What if I told you that the very first Bible, the one believed to reveal the truth of God, could actually show that God is the devil? Sounds shocking, right? Stay tuned, because in today's video, we're diving deep into ancient texts, exploring hidden mysteries, and revealing some controversial ideas that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about religion. Is it possible that the God depicted in early scriptures could have a darker side? Let's find out together. In 1945, a group of farmers in Egypt made a shocking discovery when they uncovered ancient texts buried in the desert sands. These weren't your typical Bible scriptures. They had stumbled upon the Nag Hammadi texts, ancient writings that radically challenged the religious teachings passed down for thousands of years. Alongside the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered just a few years later, these documents reveal alternative gospels and lost writings that the early church didn't want you to know about. And here's the game changer. Some of these texts are older than the gospels we know today, and they tell a very different story about the creation of the world and about the God we think we know. You see, the Bible we're familiar with, whether it's the King James Version, the New International Version, or any other, was carefully selected by the early church. They controlled the narrative. They decided what went in and what was left out. And the Gnostic texts? They didn't make the cut not because they were false, but because they were dangerous. Too controversial. Too radical. The ideas in them could shake the foundation of mainstream religion. One of the most shocking ideas in the Gnostic writings is the concept of the Demiurge. This being the creator of the material world is not the loving God we've been taught about. Instead, the Demiurge is a false god. Think about all those stories in the Old Testament where God is portrayed as jealous, angry, and even destructive. According to these ancient texts, that's not the God of ultimate love and light. That's the Demiurge, a being that created the world not out of love, but to trap souls, to keep us in the dark. Think about how the world is portrayed in Genesis. The earth is created, humans are placed in it, and immediately rules are set: don't eat from this tree, don't gain knowledge. The one time humanity dares to learn, to seek freedom, what happens? They're punished. Adam and Eve are cast out of paradise for simply seeking wisdom. But why would a loving, benevolent God punish the pursuit of knowledge? What if the real crime wasn't disobedience, but the potential for liberation? The Gnostic texts argue that the God of the Old Testament, this Demiurge, isn't interested in your freedom or enlightenment. His goal is to keep you trapped in the material world, ignorant of your true potential. And here's the twist. Early Christians knew this, at least some of them. Entire movements, like the Valentinians, believed that the God most people worship isn't the real deal. They taught that the true divine force exists beyond this world, and the Demiurge is nothing more than a cosmic mistake, a jailer, not a creator of love and light. But these radical ideas were crushed. When the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, they needed a version of the faith that reinforced power structures, not one that questioned them. So, the Gnostics were labeled heretics, their texts destroyed or hidden away. For almost 2,000 years, we've only heard one side of the story. Now, thanks to ancient discoveries like the Nag Hammadi texts, we're finally getting a glimpse of the other side. So here's the burning question. If the Bible we know was selectively curated, what does that say about the image of God that most people believe in? Could it be that the loving Creator in the New Testament and the wrathful, punishing God of the Old Testament aren't the same being? This is where the Nag Hammadi texts change everything. They tell us that this world, one filled with suffering, injustice, and evil, wasn't created by a God of love, but by a lesser, twisted entity who thinks he's God. And the early Christians who followed these teachings believed that humanity's mission wasn't to blindly obey, but to break free. Here's where the real story begins. The Nag Hammadi texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and many other ancient scriptures offer clues to an uncomfortable truth. The God of the Old Testament might just be the devil in disguise. According to the Gnostics, the God most people worship isn't the supreme creator. Nope, they believed something far more radical, that this world, this entire universe, was created by a false god, a being they called the Demiurge. And trust me, the Demiurge isn't who you think he is. The Demiurge thinks he's the ultimate god, but in reality, he's just a blind creator, completely unaware of the higher, true divine force beyond him. In Gnostic texts, the Demiurge doesn't create the material world out of love or grace, it's a cage. This world, the one we live in, is a trap. And guess what? You and I, we're stuck in it. Look around, this world is full of suffering, corruption, and pain. If you think about it, it almost feels designed that way, doesn't it? Well, according to Gnosticism, that's not by accident. The Demiurge wanted to keep us in ignorance, enslaved by the physical world, constantly distracted by the chaos of everyday life, so we never realize our true potential. This world was built to deceive us, to make us believe this is all there is. And at the top of this false reality, the Demiurge sits, basking in his illusion of power. But here's the kicker. The Gnostics didn't just see the Demiurge as a problem. They believed we have something inside us that he fears, a spark of the true divine. Deep within each of us is a fragment of higher consciousness, a piece of the divine realm that the Demiurge can't touch. That's why he works so hard to keep us ignorant, why the whole system of this world is designed to distract and control us. He knows that if we wake up to the truth, his grip over us weakens. Now you might wonder, why would anyone worship a being like this? Because the Demiurge is a master manipulator. He's not just a creator, he's a tyrant. He wants worship, obedience, and fear. He keeps people in line by presenting himself as the ultimate authority, demanding blind faith and submission. And for the most part, it's worked. Most of the world's religious systems, especially the traditional teachings of the Old Testament, reinforce this idea that we're supposed to fear God, submit to his will, and never question his authority. In Gnostic teachings, the true God is often called the One, a being of pure consciousness and light, completely separate from the chaos and corruption of the material world. But here's the catch. The Demiurge is totally unaware of this higher reality. He believes he's the only God because he's blind to anything greater than himself, trapped in his own illusion of power. And that's not all. The Gnostics also introduce a figure called Sophia, a divine being with a central role in this cosmic drama. According to their teachings, Sophia made a mistake when she tried to create without the consent of the true God. Her error led to the birth of the Demiurge. Once she realized her mistake, Sophia became deeply involved in helping humanity wake up from the Demiurge's control. She represents wisdom, enlightenment, and the true path to spiritual liberation. So, what does this mean for us? The Gnostics believed that awakening, or gnosis, was the key. Gnosis is the knowledge of this hidden truth, the realization that the material world is a deception and that we're capable of escaping it. But the Demiurge doesn't want us to discover this. He wants to keep us trapped in ignorance, constantly distracted by material desires, societal expectations, and the fear of punishment. Here's where things get even more interesting. In Gnostic thinking, the serpent in the Garden of Eden wasn't the villain of the story. In fact, the serpent represented a force of liberation. It offered humanity knowledge, the very thing the Demiurge didn't want us to have. The Gnostics flipped the entire story of Genesis on its head. To them, the God who told Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge wasn't protecting them, he was keeping them in ignorance. And the serpent? The serpent was trying to wake them up. I know it sounds wild, but it makes you rethink everything you've been told. If the Demiurge is a tyrannical being, keeping humanity in chains, then the concept of salvation changes completely. Salvation isn't about obedience to a higher power, it's about liberation. The real goal, according to the Gnostics, is to break free from the Demiurge's influence, to realize that the material world is a distraction, and to reconnect with the true divine force that exists beyond it. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This is a question we've all asked at some point. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? Why is life filled with pain, disease, natural disasters, and all the things that make us question everything? Well, the Gnostics had a radical answer to that question. They didn't believe that the suffering in this world was some great mystery we're meant to just accept or part of a divine plan we couldn't understand. No, they believed that suffering exists because the God who created this world wasn't good. It wasn't that God was allowing evil to happen. It was that the very foundation of this world was flawed because it was created by a flawed being. The Gnostics saw the creator of this world, the Demiurge, as either incompetent or outright malevolent. And when you start looking at the world through that lens, things begin to make a strange kind of sense. Think about some of the major events from the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. God wipes out nearly all of humanity in the flood, destroys Sodom and Gomorrah with fire, sends plagues upon Egypt, even killing the firstborns. These aren't the actions of a benevolent, loving God. They're acts of vengeance and destruction. It's almost like the Bible itself is trying to tell us something, but maybe we've been interpreting it wrong. The Gnostics would point to these stories and say, of course the world is messed up. It was designed that way. In their view, the Demiurge wasn't interested in creating a perfect paradise. He created a world of suffering, pain, and control. His goal was to keep humanity trapped in this flawed existence, so we'd never reach beyond it to discover the truth. This world isn't a test of our faith. It's a prison. And evil? It's not some mystery we have to blindly accept. It's baked into the system itself. Now that completely flips the whole concept of good and evil on its head, doesn't it? We're taught that evil exists for a reason. But what if it's not a test? What if it's a symptom of a deeper, hidden truth about the world we live in? We're often told that suffering exists because of human free will, temptation, or that we're being tested. But the Gnostics saw things differently. They believed that the material world was corrupt from the start, not because we failed, but because the being who created it was corrupt. So, when people ask, why does God allow suffering? The Gnostic answer is shockingly simple, because the God who rules over this world thrives on it. The Demiurge, according to Gnosticism, doesn't care about human suffering. In fact, it's part of his system of control. He keeps us down, keeps us fearful, keeps us worshiping him, all while the true divine reality, the higher pure consciousness beyond this world, remains hidden from us. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. The idea of suffering as control isn't just a spiritual concept, it plays out in everyday life. Think about it. How many of our major systems, governments, religions, even social norms are built around control? They all have a way of keeping us in line, telling us what's right, what's wrong, and why we should be afraid if we step out of line. The Gnostics would argue that this is exactly what the Demiurge wants. A world built on fear and suffering makes for obedient followers. And then there's the concept of punishment. The Bible is full of stories where God punishes people for disobedience. But the Gnostics believed that these punishments weren't about justice or morality, they were about maintaining control. Take the story of Job, for example. Here's a man who does everything right, follows all the rules, and yet he suffers horribly, losing everything. Why? Because the Demiurge, the god of this world, doesn't care about fairness. He's all about control. Now, this is where things get even deeper. If the creator of this world is flawed, then the suffering we experience isn't some cosmic lesson in morality. It's not about teaching us to be better or more faithful. It's about keeping us distracted, lost in pain, too broken to see the bigger picture. This flips the entire concept of faith upside down. Faith, in this view, isn't about blind obedience to a higher power. It's about seeing through the deception, breaking free from the system of control, and awakening to the truth that lies beyond it all. Instead of accepting suffering as part of God's plan, the Gnostics believed in rejecting the system altogether. They weren't seeking salvation through obedience or fearing punishment, they were striving for liberation. And if we're questioning the nature of God in these ancient texts, then we have to dive into one of the most misunderstood figures in religious history, Satan. Now, before you jump to conclusions, hear me out. What if Satan isn't the ultimate evil we've been told about? What if, instead, he's the hero of the story? I know it sounds wild, but this idea is much older than you might think. In Gnostic tradition, Satan, or more specifically, Lucifer, is viewed very differently. Lucifer isn't seen as some evil being trying to corrupt humanity for fun. Instead, he's seen as the one who offers knowledge, enlightenment, and freedom. In some interpretations, that makes him the true liberator of humanity. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden. We all know the story. Adam and Eve are living in paradise. Everything is perfect, and they have just one rule: don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Then, along comes the serpent, who tempts Eve to eat the fruit. Eve does, Adam follows, and boom, they're banished from Eden. But here's the thing. What was the serpent really offering? Knowledge, awareness, the ability to see the world for what it truly is. Think about it. The serpent didn't trick Eve into something meaningless. He gave her, and by extension, all of us, the chance to wake up, to see beyond the limits of the garden, to understand the difference between good and evil. That's not a villainous move. That's a gift that opens up an entirely new level of consciousness. And if the God of the Old Testament didn't want Adam and Eve to have that knowledge, what does that say about him? This is where the Gnostics come in again. They believed that the serpent in the garden wasn't Satan in the way we usually think of him. Instead, they saw him as the bringer of enlightenment, the one who dared to challenge the oppressive control of the Demiurge and offer humanity the chance to see the truth. Lucifer, in the Gnostic perspective, wasn't a villain. He was a symbol of rebellion against the Demiurge's control. By offering knowledge, the serpent was giving humanity the key to escape ignorance, the very thing the Demiurge wanted to preserve. In this light, Lucifer wasn't humanity's enemy. He was our ally, the one who dared to defy the false god and reveal the truth. This completely flips the narrative. Instead of being the ultimate figure of evil, Lucifer becomes a symbol of light literally. The name Lucifer comes from the Latin lux fer, meaning light bringer. He's the one who brings enlightenment, challenges authority, and offers the message: you don't have to live in ignorance. You don't have to accept the world as it is. Now think about how radical this idea is. If you've grown up viewing God as the ultimate authority and Satan as the ultimate rebel, this feels like a complete reversal of everything you've been taught. But that's exactly why the early church worked so hard to suppress these Gnostic ideas. A story where the rebel is the hero and the creator is the villain. That's a dangerous narrative for any institution built on obedience and control. Let's take it even further. In some Gnostic writings, Lucifer isn't just a symbol of rebellion. He represents a deeper truth about power and freedom. The Demiurge wants submission. He craves followers who don't question, don't seek knowledge, and obey without understanding. But Lucifer? He represents the belief that true power comes from challenging authority, from seeking knowledge, and from breaking free of the limits imposed on us. This theme isn't unique to Gnostic texts. We see it echoed in mythology and literature throughout history. Look at the story of Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. He was punished for his defiance, just like Lucifer, but he's celebrated as a hero. Why? Because he dared to challenge the gods and give humanity something valuable, the fire of knowledge. Both Lucifer and Prometheus symbolize the defiance that brings enlightenment, and in many ways, they embody the struggle for freedom from oppressive control. These are figures who challenge us to ask, what does true power look like? Is it submission, or is it the courage to seek out the truth even when it's forbidden? Imagine if rebellion against authority wasn't inherently evil, but the key to true freedom. What if Lucifer, the figure we've been taught to see as the ultimate villain, was actually a symbol of empowerment? Just like Prometheus in mythology, or the serpent in the Garden of Eden, Lucifer risks everything to bring knowledge to humanity. The fruit he offers in Eden isn't a trick, it's enlightenment. In this perspective, the act of rebellion isn't just defiance, it's liberation. If the demiurge is a false god who thrives on control, then standing up against him becomes an act of breaking free. Lucifer, as the symbol of this rebellion, shifts from being the embodiment of evil to a figure of empowerment, someone who challenges us to question, to seek knowledge, and to forge our own paths. The message becomes clear. We don't have to accept the world as it is. We can challenge the rules, ask the hard questions, and awaken to a greater truth. It's no coincidence that Lucifer is portrayed as the ultimate villain in mainstream religious texts. If you're in power, the last thing you want is people questioning your authority, right? But the Gnostics, along with other ancient traditions, saw through that. They understood that real power, real freedom comes from breaking away from control and embracing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. Now let's dive deeper into an even more intriguing figure, Jesus. But not the Jesus you might be used to hearing about. In the Gnostic tradition, Jesus wasn't just a savior sent to redeem humanity from sin. He was a messenger sent to reveal the truth about the demiurge and to help us wake up from the illusion of this world. The Gnostic view of Jesus is radically different from traditional Christianity. According to these teachings, Jesus didn't come to reinforce the authority of the God of the Old Testament. In fact, he came to oppose it. He wasn't telling people to blindly follow the laws laid down by the demiurge. Instead, he was offering something much deeper: salvation through knowledge, or gnosis. And this knowledge wasn't about sin or moral rules. It was about recognizing that the material world is a prison, a deception. The true mission wasn't to obey, but to break free. The Gnostics saw Jesus as more than just a figure of faith. He was a profound teacher here to awaken humanity. His message? The God most people worship isn't the ultimate source of goodness and light. Jesus urged us to look beyond the surface, revealing that the world we think we know is actually a trap. In many Gnostic texts, particularly the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus isn't portrayed as a miracle worker focused on sin and punishment. Instead, he emerges as a teacher of hidden wisdom. His parables and teachings are intentionally cryptic, not to confuse, but to lead us to a deeper reality, one that the demiurge desperately wants to keep hidden from us. Jesus often spoke about the kingdom of God, but the Gnostics believed this kingdom wasn't just a physical paradise we would reach after death. It represented a state of spiritual awakening that exists beyond the material world. The Gnostic Jesus didn't emphasize obedience to religious laws. In fact, he often challenged them. Remember how he clashed with the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his time? The Gnostics viewed these confrontations as more than mere disagreements over rules. They believed that Jesus was actively rejecting the demiurge's system of control. He wasn't here to ensure that people followed religious dogma. He was here to liberate them from it. This idea shines through even more clearly in Gnostic texts that didn't make it into the New Testament. Take the Gospel of Judas, for instance. In this version, Judas isn't the villain we've been taught to despise. Instead, he's the disciple who truly understands Jesus' message. According to this narrative, Judas's so-called betrayal wasn't an act of treachery. It was a crucial part of a divine plan to help Jesus escape the prison of the material world. Judas was the only one who really got it, who understood that Jesus' mission wasn't about dying for humanity's sins, but about awakening to a higher truth, revealing the truth that would liberate them from the demiurge's control. The Gnostics didn't see Jesus' death as a payment for humanity's sins. Instead, they viewed his crucifixion as a powerful demonstration of the ultimate truth that the material world and even death itself are illusions. Jesus' resurrection wasn't merely a miraculous proof of his divinity, it was a bold statement. It showed that the demiurge's greatest weapon, death, held no real power over those who had attained true gnosis. For the Gnostics, the real message of Jesus was one of awakening. He wasn't here to save people from their sins through his death on the cross. He was here to free them from ignorance. His teachings were meant to awaken individuals to the realization that they didn't have to be slaves to the Demiurge's rules, that the divine truth resided within themselves. The crucifixion? It wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of realizing that death, like everything else in this world, was part of the illusion. When you frame it this way, the Gnostic interpretation of Jesus transforms everything. It's not about following a strict set of rules or performing rituals to get into heaven. It's about transcending this world, piercing through the veil the Demiurge has placed before us, and reconnecting with the true divine source. But this radical thinking was precisely what the early church couldn't allow to flourish. A Jesus who taught that the God of the Old Testament wasn't the true God? A message urging people to seek enlightenment instead of blind obedience? That was a revolutionary idea that could threaten the very foundation of institutional religion. That's why alternative gospels and texts were buried, burned, or branded as heresy. The Jesus who offered liberation from the Demiurge's system wasn't the Jesus the early church wanted people to follow. They needed a figure who reinforced authority, not one who encouraged questioning it. If you've been following along, you've already seen how the Gnostics flipped the script on God, Satan, and even Jesus. But there's one more key player in this cosmic drama, Sophia. She's not a name you hear often in mainstream religious discussions, but in Gnostic teachings, she's one of the most significant figures, perhaps the most important. Sophia is viewed as a divine figure, often seen as the embodiment of wisdom itself, and she resides in the higher spiritual realm, far beyond the confines of the material world. But here's where things take a fascinating turn, actually responsible for the creation of the Demiurge. Yes, you heard that right. The being we've been discussing didn't just pop into existence out of nowhere. He was the result of an accident made by Sophia. But don't get it twisted, Sophia wasn't acting out of malice or evil intent. It was more of a slip-up, a mistake that occurred when she attempted to create something on her own without the guidance of the higher divine forces. In her eagerness to bring forth creation, she inadvertently birthed the Demiurge. And as soon as she realized what she had done, she recognized it as a disaster. The Demiurge, believing himself to be the supreme being, went ahead and crafted the material world, the very one we find ourselves trapped in today. But Sophia didn't just walk away after this blunder. She didn't abandon humanity to the Demiurge's control. Instead, she became deeply involved in trying to fix the mess. This duality makes Sophia such a captivating figure. She represents both the source of the problem and the force attempting to rectify it. In some Gnostic texts, she's portrayed as mourning for humanity, feeling profound sorrow over the suffering inflicted by the world her creation has wrought. But she doesn't give up. Her story is one of redemption, not in the traditional sense of sacrifice or bearing humanity's sins. Instead, her role is about awakening. Sophia works tirelessly behind the scenes to guide humanity toward gnosis, or true knowledge. It's as if she's sending out signals, trying to rouse us to the reality that the material world isn't all there is, that we've been ensnared in an illusion crafted by the Demiurge. Ironically, the Demiurge, in all his arrogance and ignorance, has no idea that Sophia exists above him. He thinks he's the only God, blissfully unaware that there's a force of divine wisdom actively working to undermine his control. But Sophia knows exactly what's going on. She sees the Demiurge for what he truly is, a flawed creator presiding over a flawed world. Welcome to Blessovia Science TV, where we take you on an exhilarating journey through the cosmos and unravel the mysteries of science. We are excited to offer you the opportunity to become a valued member of our ever-growing community of cosmic enthusiasts and knowledge seekers. Exclusive access to cosmic content. As a member of Blessovia Science TV, you will gain exclusive access to a treasure trove of cosmic content, including documentaries, interviews with leading scientists, space missions updates, and awe-inspiring visualizations of the universe, live Q, and sessions with experts. Your membership will grant you the chance to participate in live Q&A sessions with renowned scientists, astronomers, and space explorers. Get your burning questions answered by those who push the boundaries of human knowledge. Embark on a journey that spans the cosmos and join us in unraveling the secrets of the universe. Become a Blasovia Science TV member today, and together we will reach for the stars. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and share. Don't forget to leave your comment.